They say the first sound ever heard in the catacombs beneath Armenthal Abbey was not the voice of a man, but something far more ancient. It echoed through the bones of the earth like the exhale of a god long buried. It wasn't recorded. It wasn't even sung. It was ... invoked. In the year 1247, under a sky swollen with soot and firelight, a monk named Mathjas arrived at the gates of Armenthal. He came alone, carrying no possessions but a single vellum scroll bound in dried sinew and sealed with black wax. His eyes were glassy with fever, and his voice hoarse from days of silence. Cracked open only to whisper one thing: "I must sing the hymn." The brothers of Armenthal were no strangers to eccentrics. The abbey stood at the edge of the known world, a place where winds carried rumors and the trees grew gnarled from hearing too much. But even here, even among men who copied cursed texts and fasted till their bones sang, Matthias was ... different. He refused bread. He refused sleep. He spent days staring into the shadows cast by the chapel's torches, whispering to them as if they whispered back. On the seventh night, he finally opened his scroll, and that's when the chanting began. It was not Latin, not Greek, not even the cracked tongue of the ancient Copts. No one recognized it. But it wormed into the ears of the monks like incense into lungs, heavy, clinging, sacred. Some said the walls wept when he sang. Others swore the candles flickered backward, smoke trailing toward the flame rather than away. Brother Alwyn, the chronicler, wrote in his journal, "I felt my mother's voice, who has been dead for 20 years, call me from the stone." That night, Brother Alwyn threw himself from the bell tower, but this was only the beginning. The hymn, if it could be called that, had awakened something older than language. Hidden within the dissonant tones and impossible harmonies was a structure, a pattern, carved like a labyrinth into sound. Mathjas claimed it was not his to compose, only to recall. He said he had found it in a ruined temple near the Black Sea, etched into stone not with tools, but with heat, as if molten claws had written it into the earth itself. By the 10th day, 6 monks had vanished. No doors had opened. No footsteps were heard. But in each case, their beds were found soaked in something not quite blood, darker, tar-like, smelling faintly of frankincense and iron. Their names were struck from the registry by order of the abbot, whose hands began to tremble when touching ink. The hymn spread. Without permission, without even conscious will, the surviving monks found themselves humming its broken melody in their sleep. At dawn, they woke with torn lips and aching throats. One was found choking on his own tongue, which had curled backward like a dried leaf. When asked why he sang it, his last breath came in a voice not his own, because it must be heard. Mathjas never stopped. He sat in the chapel, eyes rolled white, mouth wide, teeth bloodied from strain, and sang. Not with joy, not with fear, but with necessity. As though something had placed a hook through the meat of his soul and tugged it upward, toward the unseen vault above them. The notes grew sharper, deeper. They didn't rise, they sank. Into the stone, into the bones, into the silence beneath the world. And in that silence, something stirred. It was in tea until Brother Theodric opened one of the abbey. Those oldest volumes, a forbidden catalogue of pre-flood mythologies, that they found the first clue. A symbol etched on the margin of a page. An eye weeping fire beneath a cracked halo. The same symbol that had been stitched into Mathjas's robe, hidden beneath his scapular. The symbol had no name, but the text beside it spoke of a lamentation engine, an artifact of sound that could summon the gaze of that which dwells between prayers. The monks scoffed. Then they remembered the vanished brothers. Then they burned the book. But the song did not stop. In fact, as the ashes of the pages scattered across the cloister garden, Mathjas's voice changed. No longer was it his voice alone. It had become ... layered, many-tongued. Some voices in unison, others in counterpoint, creating a harmony so complex it caused the air itself to ripple. It sounded like a cathedral collapsing in slow motion. Brother Janek tried to confront him, but the moment he entered the chapel, he screamed, not from pain, from recognition. "It's her voice," he wept. "It's my sister. I buried her." And that was the most terrifying part. The hymn did not create something new. It echoed what already existed. The sorrow, the grief, the rage hidden beneath the skin of every soul who heard it. It brought those shadows into song, and once sung, they could not be unsung. By the 14th day, the abbot ordered Matthews chained. But when they entered the chapel to take him, he was gone. All that remained was a smear of soot across the altar and the scroll open, with its symbols now glowing faintly red, as if pulsing with memory. They sealed the chapel, they buried the scroll, they vowed silence. And for nearly 800 years, they kept it. Until last winter, when a restoration team entered the ruins of Armenthal to catalog its stained glass windows. They found the chapel door broken. They found the altar cracked. And beneath the rubble, they found the scroll. Open, unmarked, as if waiting for someone to remember the melody, to hum it again, to finish the hymn. The scroll should have turned to dust, was the consensus among archivists and historians alike. The parchment bore no signs of decay, no fungal bloom, no brittleness of time. It looked as if it had been written only yesterday, yet the ink, when tested, contained no recognizable compounds. Just trace elements of sulfur, myrrh, and something else. Hemocyanin, the copper-based blood pigment found in deep-sea creatures. The lead restorer, Dr. Amelia Voss, was not a superstitious woman. Raised in Dresden, trained in Paris, her credentials were beyond reproach. She had catalogued relics from plague-ridden catacombs and even reconstructed mosaics buried under Turkish salt mines. But something about the scroll unnerved her, not the writing. That was strange, yes. Filled with spiraling glyphs that seemed to shift when stared at too long. But the silence around it, whenever she entered the chapel to work, the sound of birds outside ceased. The wind held its breath. Even the dust seemed to hesitate in its dance through light. Amelia began to dream in languages she didn't know. She wrote them down, obsessively. Woke in sweat, clutching phrases like resonance is remembrance, and the mouth of the earth is never full. She didn't remember writing them, yet her notebooks filled. Then the voices came. Soft at first, it's like a distant choir in another building, muffled, too faint to parse. Then louder, clearer, closer, always the same chant, rising in unnatural meter, stitched with tones that felt like rusted nails dragged across her skull. Her colleagues noticed her change. She no longer attended meetings. Her fingers bled from transcribing. The chapel lights failed whenever she entered, flickering as if unwilling to illuminate what she had become. And then one morning, she wasn't there. They found her body, or rather what was left of it, in the nave. She had torn her own vocal cords, her throat a ragged wound, but her face was smiling, serene, blissful. Around her, the stone tiles were carved with lyrics in that same spiraling script. Some were etched with her fingernails. Others had no apparent tool marks at all, just seared impressions. As if sung directly into the stone by a voice too heavy for flesh, she had completed the first verse. The scroll, which had remained untouched for centuries, now bore new lines, new glyphs. Written in her blood. Authorities tried to intervene. The chapel was sealed again, this time under armed supervision. A Vatican envoy arrived under veil of night, bearing with him a book bound in obsidian plates and locked with 13 seals. He called himself Father Audron, though none could find record of such a name in any order. He asked to be left alone with the scroll for 3 days. On the 4th day, he was found blind, eyes blackened, sockets fused shut by scar tissue. He could not speak, but he sang. In a voice that shook the rib cages of all who heard it. The guards fled. One had a seizure. Another went mad, gouging out his ears with a broken pen. But Father Audron simply stood, arms outstretched, and chanted in a tongue no one recognized, yet everyone felt. A chant that smelled of old paper and burned feathers, of copper coins and wet soil. A chant that made even the rats in the foundation flee toward daylight. He died shortly after. Autopsy revealed his lungs had been etched from the inside with the same sigils as the scroll, not tattooed, not carved, etched by resonance, as though his breath had become a stylus, and the act of chanting had inscribed the hymn upon his flesh. They buried him in an unmarked grave, encased in salt and lead. But the recordings ... remained, for the restoration team had captured his chant on multiple devices. They shared it foolishly with a team of phonologists and linguists at a private institute in Geneva. One of them, Dr. Antoine Delacroix, was the first to isolate the harmonic ghost patterns embedded in the chant. These were not audible frequencies, they were resonant shapes, visible only when the sound waves were slowed and passed through liquid helium. What they saw were not waveforms, they were faces, hundreds of them, some screaming, others weeping. A few smiling with mouths far too wide for their skulls. Dr. Delacroix went silent for a week. Then, without warning, he threw himself from the Institute's observation tower. His suicide note was short. The chant remembers us, and now we remember it. Yet the hymn had already found a new voice. In the ruins of Armenthal, a local shepherd claimed to hear children laughing beneath the earth. When he followed the sound, he found a cave newly opened, one that had not existed on any topographical map before. Inside were symbols on the wall, fresh, wet, singing. His dog refused to enter. He did not return. But 3 nights later, the chant was heard again. Not from within the chapel this time, but from beneath the village well. It echoed through the water. No matter how deep they lowered their bucket, it never reached bottom. And when they dropped a camera, the footage revealed a cavern of impossible size, walls covered in veins of black crystal pulsing in time with the hymn. For 30 seconds, the audio captured what sounded like a choir of thousands, all chanting one phrase, over and over. The song that ends remembering. The feed cut out. The well was sealed, but by then it was too late. The melody had escaped its tomb. And the world, though it didn't know it, had begun to hum along. It began slowly, as all pandemics of sound do. A university student developed a fixation with Gregorian chants, but not the kind preserved in Vatican archives. Hers were different, dissonant, asymmetric. She claimed to have discovered them in fragments buried inside. Renaissance compositions, hidden not in the notes themselves, but in the spaces between. She called them the hymns in the hollow. Weeks later, her roommate awoke to find her standing barefoot in the snow, humming. Her lips were blue, her ears bleeding. The snow around her had melted in a perfect circle, despite the temperature being below freezing. When asked what she was doing, she answered, listening to what wants to be sung. She never spoke again. Within a month, similar incidents surfaced. In Venice, Prague, Kyoto. Each time someone claimed to hear the same melody that had once echoed beneath Armenthal. A melody with no key, no scale, no signature, yet always familiar, like a memory from a dream you never had. A London sound engineer, analyzing ancient pipe organ recordings, isolated a frequency he claimed was impossibly subtractive, a sound that did not add noise to silence, but carved away meaning from within it. His team dismissed it as a software glitch, till one of them played the track backward and heard their own name whispered in their mother's voice, though she had died 30 years earlier. He destroyed the hard drives. But that night, he found the waveform burned into his ceiling, shaped in candle soot. Even sleep became a door. People across the globe began to dream in harmonics, not music. Resonance. Patterns that vibrated their teeth and pulled at the roots of their memories. Composer in Oslo, sleepwalking, etched an entire symphony onto her bedroom walls, in black chalk. Each note aligned with seismic activity in the Mariana Trench. Each tremor matched the hymn's rhythmic pulse. Something beneath the ocean had begun to respond. And in Cairo, a team translating pre-dynastic funerary rites discovered a line repeated across dozens of tombs, once considered unrelated. To sing is to bind, to chant is to call, but to echo is to open. The Vatican convened a secret symposium of theologians, historians, and physicists. It lasted 72 hours. Only one transcript remains. A single page, smuggled by an unnamed attendee before the records were incinerated. The final paragraph reads, "We are not the first to hear it, only the first to forget that we already had." Then, the disappearances began. Not en masse, not yet. Just singular, pointed vanishings. A cellist in Vienna vanished mid-concert. One moment she bowed into her instrument, the next, the strings hummed on without her. The seat she had occupied was scorched, the note she'd been playing, a pitch that matched the Armenthal frequency exactly. She'd completed the phrase, and someone had answered. Around this time, linguists returned to the original scroll found at Armenthal, hoping to decode its origin. They subjected the ink to high-spectrum analysis. Under UV light, a second text emerged, not written over the first, but underneath it, like a subdermal tattoo. It wasn't a hymn, it was a warning. Written in Proto-Blate, a language lost for over 4 millennia, it read, "The song is not a song. It is the breath of the thing that sings from behind the stars. If you hear it, cover your mouth. If you remember it, forget." But it was already too late. The hymn had found a modern host. A child. She was 7, living in a rural village outside of Lyon. Her parents reported that she'd begun humming in her sleep. Softly, sweetly, then louder. She stopped eating. Refused to speak. Her drawings changed. What were once forests and animals became spirals, bones, mouths filled with eyes. Doctors dismissed it as childhood schizophrenia, till the birds began to die. First in her garden, then across the village, all with burst eardrums and blackened beaks. Autopsies revealed that each had hemorrhaged from an inner resonance, as if the frequency that killed them came from inside their skulls. One night, during a storm, the girl stood in the field behind her house and began to sing. Every dog within 5 kilometers howled in unison. The wind stopped. The power grid collapsed, and the clouds above formed into a spiral, matching the pattern etched into her bedroom walls. Then came the thunder, not from the sky, but from beneath the earth. Seismologists recorded the shockwave. It lasted 23 seconds, the exact length of the original Armenthal chant. By morning, the girl was gone. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just her shadow burned into the grass, arms outstretched, as though she had been taken mid-note. Governments began to classify incidents. Files were sealed. Research was suppressed. But the chant, the resonance, had already infected the collective unconscious. You could hear it in power lines at night, in the whir of ceiling fans, in the breath between words on old tapes, not music, but memory, humming itself back into being. Across the world, survivors of these incidents described the same dream, a cathedral without walls, floating in darkness, lit by a sun that pulsed like a beating heart. And in its center, a choir of mouths, not faces, just mouths, chanting in a language made of grief and gravity. They sang not to summon, they sang to warn, but no one listened, not in time. The first city fell in silence, not in flames, not in war, but in a stillness so complete it unraveled the world. It's Nicosia, Cyprus, 2:17 a.m. Local time, every clock stopped. Every voice stilled. Security cameras captured the moment, people mid-step, mid-sentence, mid-laughter, frozen, then collapsing like marionettes with cut strings. No screams, no panic. Just one thing caught on every microphone, from airport towers to baby monitors. A soft, multi-layered hum. Not mechanical, organic, like breath, harmonized and infinite. The United Nations called it an electromagnetic anomaly. But those who studied the waveform heard more. A pattern. A response. The resonance of the hymn had crossed the threshold. No longer a whisper, hiding in shadows. It had become a language. Not of syntax or syllable, but consequence. Each city that had heard it even once, through the mouth of a child, a backward tape, dream half remembered, began to echo back, as if singing a part they didn't know they'd learned. Entire populations began to dream in harmony. And from those dreams it woke. What it was, no one could agree. A consciousness? A deity? A wound in the fabric of creation that remembered the scream of its opening? Some called it the choral abyss. Others whispered the old name found beneath the Armenthal scroll. Shah Alenekthra, the mouth that hungers for memory. But it didn't devour flesh. That would be mercy. It consumed remembrance. Those caught in the wave didn't die. They forgot. Not just their names or their families, but everything. Language, shape, identity. In cities like Caracas, Bergen, Aleppo, people stood blank-eyed in streets, not weeping, not screaming, but humming, lost to themselves. Echoes without origin, and always the same refrain. To echo is to open. In response, a desperate plan was formed, not by governments, but by those who still remembered enough to resist. Historians, composers, monks, and audio engineers gathered beneath a decommissioned satellite array in Svalbard. They called themselves the Scholomans Choir. Their theory was heretical. If the hymn had once been used to summon, then perhaps a counter-hymn, a closing chord, might sever the link. But they needed to find the first voice, the original invocation. 8. The pure, unbroken line before it was scattered across time and madness. And they did. In a cave beneath Anatolia, etched in obsidian stone, lay the same glyphs as Armanthal, but in reverse. Not a chant, a cancellation. The unhymn, sound designed not to be heard, but to erase what had already been. They built the instrument from human bone and resonant metal, not strings, but chords spun from silver and soaked in monk's blood. They called it the breath organ. It did not play notes. It wept them. Each keystroke did not produce sound, but silenced a frequency nearby, scalpel of absence. And when the time came, the choir sang, not in harmony. In defiance, the sound shattered glass 3 kilometers away. Mountains groaned. The air thickened, as if resisting. But for one brief moment, the hymn staggered. The wave paused. Those who had been humming stopped. Some fell to their knees, clutching their heads as their own memories came rushing back, jagged and wild. But then something answered, not with rage, with sorrow, for they had misunderstood. The hymn had not been a weapon. It had been a cry from something trapped, something buried, something that had once been worshipped, not out of reverence, but obligation. It had been sealed by song, long before language, by a species now extinct, whose only gift was the ability to bind sound to structure. And we had undone it. 8. Piece by piece, voice by voice, echo by echo. The final verse was never meant to be sung by us. It was meant to be sung to us. And now, as the closing chord rang out and the world waited in silence, the sky opened, not in light, but in resonance. A colorless wind passed over every continent, every forest, every ocean, and carried with it the one truth that broke every mind it touched. This world is not ours. We were born into its stillness. We are the breath between its notes. We are the silence it left behind. And in the great cathedral of stars, a new hymn began, one that we could not sing, only remember, over and over, until we too were forgotten.